Within the past century, our technology has advanced to extraordinary levels. 100 years ago, the idea that we would reach the moon was nothing more than a fantasy, yet now it is a fact of our everyday existence. With every single day we, as a united species, come closer to laying claim on other planets in our solar system and to exploring more space to see what is truly lurking out there just beyond our reach. So today we'll be looking at 3 scientific announcements and discoveries. Physicists at CERN just discovered a brand new particle. Researchers from the Large Hadron Collider Beauty Experiment, referred to as the LHCb from CERN, discovered a never-before-seen particle which has since been named the tetraquark or TCC+. The EPSHEP, otherwise known as the European Physical Society Conference on High-Energy Physics, have stated that this particle is composed of 2 quarks and 2 antiquarks, and referred to it as an exotic hadron. A quark is, in summary, the foundation of what matter is made of. These quarks can fuse together to form hadrons. The process is like that of neutrons and protons in the modern theory of atoms. What the EPSHEP meant by calling the tetraquark exotic was that the matter of TCC+ lives longer than any other such particle in existence before it. Furthermore, no other particles are known to contain 2 quarks and 2 antiquarks in quite the same way. Within recent memory, there have been several similar discoveries of exotic hadrons, most of these possessing up to 5 quarks at a time. But the TCC+ stands out even among the strangest of particles. This is because quarks have weights and the tetraquark has heavy quarks and light antiquarks. The antiquarks in question are also different kinds, with one being an up antiquark and the other being a down antiquark. As a direct result, the decay process of the TCC+ becomes vastly complicated to the degree where it takes an incredibly long amount of time to decay. Inside the world of quantum physics, the discovery of the tetraquark brings with it unbound potential for the future. There is a chance of there being even more particles like the TCC+ out there waiting to be found, all of which could increase our understanding of this vast, unknown cosmos which we deem our home. Further studies on this particle are set to be conducted soon, with CERN physicists undoubtedly excited to conduct deeper research into this matter, as it might reveal much about quantum physics that was previously unknown. NASA's Perseverance rover comes up empty after first Mars drilling attempt. Perseverance is one of NASA's Mars rovers. It has spent the last 6 months exploring the surface of the red planet in an attempt to drill into the Martian soil and bring new samples of Mars's exterior to Earth for in-depth analysis. The rover's mission was seemingly going well, and on the 6th of August, NASA was sure that it was a success after receiving a photograph of the drilled hole from the rover. Until Perseverance's operators opened the tube the sample was supposed to be in, and instead of Martian rock, they found it empty. Jennifer Trosper, Perseverance's project manager, stated about the occurrence. It went really well, other than the rock behaved in a way that didn't allow us to get any sample in the tube. We need a more cooperative type of rock. This one was crumbly. It may have had a surface that was hard, but once we got in there, all the grains just sort of came apart. However, during the sampling tests on Earth, rocks did not crumble and none of the other rovers had similar issues. At the very least, all is not lost. Despite the tube sample lacking the desired rock, it did hold something vital: Martian air. Though the sample of Mars' atmosphere was an afterthought meant for a different sample tube, it provided NASA with a portion of further samples to analyze, and with 43 other sample tubes, Perseverance can easily try again to collect more Martian rocks. Despite the worrying implications behind Perseverance failing to bring the rock to Earth, Trosper assures the public that it is not a problem with Perseverance itself. This September, Perseverance's project team plans on utilizing the help of scientific instruments to aid the rover in its quest to deliver a sample. The instruments will confirm the sample was taken and placed into the tube before it gets sealed. This next sample tube will not be sent back to Earth just yet, as NASA plans on having Perseverance fill and keep the remainder of its tubes sealed until they are picked up at a later time in the future during other Mars missions. Martian samples are crucial for investigations regarding life on Mars and whether past life once flourished on the rocky planet. Louise Jandura, The chief engineer in charge of the Perseverance project remarked how what followed later in the morning was a roller coaster of emotions. Took a few minutes for this reality to sink in. Such a thing will not occur in the future. It is evident that many members of the NASA team were distraught over the lack of sample and took Perseverance's failure to heart. One theory suggests that Perseverance had the core rock but dropped it, though if this happened, NASA would have surely found the remnants of the sample's broken pieces on the surface of Mars, which they have not. According to a member of the team, the tube itself was very clean, not even dusty, suggesting that there was perhaps nothing that had ever gotten into the tube. Currently, the best theory is that the rover accidentally destroyed the core sample while it drilled the surface, explaining why they cannot see any broken pieces. The Jezero crater where NASA is hoping to collect samples from was once a lake, so there is a great hope there will be traces of primordial microbes hidden in the rocks. Where else could Cleopatra be buried? As the archaeological community continues to search for Cleopatra, theories and rumors continue to emerge as to her final resting place. It's important to remember that 20% of ancient Alexandria, the town where Cleo and Mark Antony lived, is actually underwater. So there is always a chance that their tomb sits at the bottom of the sea, in which case it's not likely that it will ever be found. In fact, French researchers began to excavate underwater in the 1990s and did find several indications of ancient life in the town. These included busts, stone sphinxes, building foundations, and more. However, nothing concrete came up directly regarding Cleopatra and Mark Antone's tomb. Therefore, the search went on. The authorities began to map the seabed and more ancient structures emerged. But they failed to find any conclusive evidence of Cleopatra's tomb. The team want to find a statue or commemorative piece of Cleopatra, which in turn may point to a tomb or burial site. Chances are, however, that this burial site is actually deep under the seafloor. Returning to Kathleen Martinez's theory of the temple burial, she spoke of why she believed that Queen Cleo had been buried in a temple. The Egyptians were superstitious religious people, and the religious link may have some weight to it. Kathleen Martinez said, "What brought me to the conclusion that Taposiris Magna was a possible place for Cleopatra's hidden tomb was the idea that when she passed away, a ritual act of deep religious significance was carried out in a very strict, spiritualized ceremony. Cleopatra negotiated with Octavian to allow her to bury Mark Antony in Egypt. She wanted to be buried with him because she wanted to reenact the legend of Isis and Osiris. The meaning of Osiris is that it grants immortality. After they have both passed away, the gods would allow Cleopatra to live with Antony in another form of existence, so they would have eternal life together. The sea, the land, or underneath both are all plausible locations where Cleopatra could have been buried. However, for the time being, it looks like the mystery continues. These mysteries continue to confuse researchers to this day. After all, a dynasty that existed thousands of years ago is bound to elicit many questions, some running deeper than others. 7 human footprints are likely the oldest evidence of Homo sapiens on the Arabian Peninsula. The autumn of 2020 saw a remarkable archaeological discovery that gave us a glimpse into the lives of ancient humans, where we traveled and possible actions taken within daily routines. There were preserved human footprints found in Saudi Arabia's Nifad Desert, where a lake once Saturday but only for a brief interaction over 100,000 years ago. There has been an analysis of the rock around this area, concluding that the sediment dates to being between 112,000 and 121,000 years old. If this dating is in fact accurate, then this makes these 7 human footprints the oldest evidence that we know of to support the presence of early Homo sapiens on the Arabian Peninsula. Biologist Matthew Stewart, affiliated with the Max Planck Institute for Chemical Ecology in Jena, Germany, and colleagues, explained that the ancient Homo sapiens were more than likely employing the site, referred to as Alathar, as a watering hole. Further explanations explain this is a likely spot to gather food due to neighboring grasslands. However, many do not think that this was a regular visit, as the research conducted upon the sediment indicated the lake had been shrinking, like many in the region in this time. Furthermore, very few hunting tools and animal bones being present implies a short-term visit too. Similar sites have found 107 camel footprints and 43 elephant footprints, though none of these carry as much scientific weight and potential for new studies as the human footprints found. What do you make of these fascinating discoveries? There are mysteries all around us, and we are fascinated by what we cannot understand. Inexplicable phenomena are discovered every day, keeping our curiosity piqued and the prospect of actually knowing the world around us a foreign concept. So today, we'll be exploring 3 fascinating discoveries, taking you from pink crater lakes in India to the deepest corners of our mysterious universe. A meteorite crater lake in India just changed color overnight. In a strange earthly phenomenon, locals, nature lovers, and of course scientists have been pleasantly surprised to discover a mysterious and sudden change in color of a crater lake in India. More specifically, the lake turned pink seemingly overnight in the western state of India called Maharashtra. Created about 50,000 years ago, Lona Lake was formed as the result of a meteorite crashing into Earth and has since become somewhat of a favorite among tourists and environmentalists and is located 500 kilometers from Mumbai. It has been reported that the lake has changed color before. What is striking about this shift is the rapid nature of this color transformation. Photos were shared widely across social media as the entirety of the lake appeared to be a gorgeous pinky hue, and scientists have tentatively attributed the color to changing saline levels as well as algae presence in the waters. Going into more detail, they explained that water levels in Lona Lake have been dropping for some time, meaning the concentration of saline has been rising. At the same time, warmer temperatures in the area have stimulated algae growth, increasing their levels to the verge of overgrowth. Almost a cyclical relationship, the algae then turns reddish in these warmer temperatures, providing an explanation for the new color of the lake. While this is scientifically correct and likely theory given by geologist Gajanan Karat, officials from the state's forest department have also collected water samples to verify and test the exact causes behind this occurrence. Lastly, there is one other theorized factor behind the lake's newfound appearance. Speculation has it that the recent lockdowns, which have put a grinding halt to industrial and factory productions, may have played a part, through the significantly lower levels of pollution seen in the surrounding air. Similarly, less human traffic in the area has had the combined effect of better natural preservation for the lake, albeit a sudden shift to this cleaner environment. Only the results from the lab's tests of the water samples can provide a completely certain explanation. But regardless of how it happened, it goes to show how beautiful and mysterious some of the Earth's natural features can be. Assassin 14KO. This discovery takes us a whopping 570 million light-years away to the distant but intriguing galaxy ESO 253G003, whose behavior has scientists baffled. Turns out, in the core of this active galaxy, there appears to be a black hole which every so often erupts. The nucleus of the galaxy in question is called Assassin 14KO, and scientists had previously observed it flaring up in the past, however up until recently believed these to be rare, infrequent events. Other theories suggested that it was a supernova and thus a one-time event whereby a star was destroyed. It is now clear that this is something else completely. Having monitored Assassin 14KO for 6 years, that data is consistent over the entirety of their observational timeframe, and that this nucleus in fact erupts approximately every 114 days. It therefore is now NASA's best example of periodic variability in an active galaxy. New theories revolve around the idea that this is the work of a supermassive black hole at the center of the galaxy, bursting every so often as it interacts with and partially a neighboring giant star close by in orbit. With the lead team of scientists on the case observing brightness levels to monitor its activity, they have so far recorded 17 flares, each roughly 114 days apart, with brightness peaking at about day 5 and then simmering down again. Given the steady clockwork nature of these cosmic events, researchers have now coordinated more directed observation attempts, using past data to predict future outbursts. Several other theories float around as to how and why these flare-ups occur, but none have been confirmed as to the one just yet, making this case all the more mysterious. Gotem 1b scientists can struggle to accurately measure the size of giant gaseous planets like Jupiter because they orbit their local stars from such a great distance. However, in this recent discovery, scientists are celebrating another win for astronomy after successfully managing to measure both the size and orbit of gas giant Gotem 1b, a name which stands for Giant Outer Transiting Exoplanet Massachusetts and is located at a decent 1,300 light-years away from Earth. Gotem 1b caught NASA's attention some 10 years ago when the Kepler Space Telescope discovered it in our solar neighborhood. From this original data, scientists noticed fluctuating brightness levels around the central star, which they deduced must have been caused by orbiting objects. After further examination, they discovered one of the planets, whose official name is Kepler 1514b, and also that it had a strangely long orbit of 218 days. Only a handful of planets discovered by the Kepler telescope have had orbits of over 200 days. This is more surprising given its dimensions, as the giant exoplanet is 5 times the mass of Jupiter, and planets this large tend not to have such large orbits. While scientists struggle to properly study and learn about Jupiter and Saturn in our own solar system, they are excited by this discovery, as it could shed some light onto a previously untouchable subject. They have also found that while Jupiter's orbit seems to slowly take the gas giant closer to the Sun over time, that Gotem 1b has not altered its orbit path at all in a similar way. This tells scientists that Jupiter's behavior is probably abnormal for an exoplanet, and that Jupiter may in fact be doing this to protect Earth from other objects in space. With this new discovery opening hundreds of doors into future study of similar giant exoplanets, both close to home and those we have not yet discovered, it's a milestone discovery for astronomers, and who knows what will come next. We are still in the process of constantly discovering and learning things so important about our own planet, as well as events unfolding thousands or even millions of light years away. And what do you make of these discoveries? Ever since the moment that our universe was created by the Big Bang more than 13.7 billion years ago, scientists have never stopped searching for answers in the process of our formation. For all the mysteries that have emerged regarding the black void that seems to surround us, that did not stop our minds from imagining the most terrifying aliens, TV shows, and science fiction concepts. Yet, as scientists venture on into the void day by day, they are only what is out there in the vastness of space. So today, we'll be taking a look at some of the latest advancements in the field of space exploration. NASA scientists detect evidence of a parallel universe where time runs backwards. For decades, our TV screens have been riddled with science fiction shows weaving stories of parallel universes and describing realms filled with time travel and aliens alike. Well, new research as recent as 2020 suggests that these ideas are not quite so far-fetched, as scientists describe actions of particles resembling expectations of parallel universes where both the rules of time and physics appear to be inverted to our own. The idea of a multiverse has not always been confined to our comic books and fictional tales. It has been suggested for numerous years that there is a likelihood of a multiverse existing, and subsequent research that has been conducted for years now has taken this possibility into account. That has considered the possibility of a parallel universe is quantum mechanics, with the many worlds theory first proposed by American physicist Hugh Everett III in 1957 whilst completing his doctoral thesis at Princeton University. This informed his relative state formulation, which has impacted the field for decades now. While undeniably influential, the impact of the many worlds interpretation has not been isolated nor uncontested by any means. At the time of publication by Everett, the leading, dominating, and ultimately competing theory was the Copenhagen interpretation, a wider explanation of quantum physics, with a much broader meaning and more contradictory ideas within it. Even today, the Copenhagen interpretation dominates the discourse and discussions of quantum mechanics. Or will that change with this new 2020 discovery? An experiment aiming to detect cosmic rays appears to have discovered particles that many scientists have suggested are from a universe, world, or realm that is parallel to our own. If a universe of this nature genuinely exists, current theories suggest that its formation likely coincides with our own, being born via the Big Bang. These leading field experts used apparatus described as a giant balloon to move NASA's Antarctic Impulsive Transient Antenna, also known as ANITA, to above Antarctica. Antarctica made for an ideal location for the employment of this technology, as the environmental factors, including dry air and a distinct lack of radio noise, left few extraneous variables to distort and corrupt the data and findings. We discovered here that Earth has a consistent arrival of high-energy particles entering our atmosphere from outer space. It has been well established that low-energy particles known as subatomic neutrinos with a mass nearing zero are able to pass through Earth with ease. We also believed, until now, that the particles with high energy have been unable to pass through our planet, being stopped by the solid matter of the Earth itself. This new research, conflicting with established premises, has been assumed to indicate that these particles are coming up out of the Earth, known as tau neutrinos as detected by ANITA. The previous idea, however, had been that we are experiencing high-energy particles coming down from outer space to the Earth. So what do scientists think this inverted trajectory means? Simply put, many physicists believe that these new, bizarre particles are traveling back in time, providing possible evidence to support the idea of a parallel universe where the time runs backwards to our own. Experimental particle physicist Peter Gorham and principal ANITA investigator explained that the only other explanation as to the odd behavior of the tau neutrino particle is that it had somehow shifted into a new particle before passing through the Earth and then changing back into its original state once again. Of course, many skeptics were quick to voice an opinion here, despite this phenomenon having seemingly limited explanations. Though we cannot be certain either way as to exactly what is happening with the tau neutrino particle. Will more particles arise to support the idea of a backward parallel universe? Or will this discovery simply become the future material of a sci-fi episode? China spacecraft sends Mars footage for the first time. Breaking news within the early days of 2021 comes from the latest space exploration mission conducted by the China National Space Administration. The 5th of February 2021 saw the release of images and video footage of the surface of Mars captured by China's Mars probe named Tianwen-1. This video footage gives us a closer insight than has ever been possible before, providing a view of Mars' surface. Tianwen-1 entered the red planet's orbit on the 10th of February 2021 and captured a clip of the surface of Mars moving in and out of view. The remarkable video footage provided by this aspirational and resoundingly successful mission shows us white craters, according to news reports. The equipment used for this fantastic space exploration quest, Tianwen-1, features a Mars and solar-powered rover and weighs a staggering 5 tons. This progress in space exploration presents a momentous step forward in the Beijing space program aiming to compete with the U.S. advancements of NASA. Could Tianwen-1, whose name translates to questions to heaven, present a turning point for exponential growth in the China National Space Administration? Current predictions and growth markets suggest that by 2022, there could be a space station fully equipped with a crew established by the China National Space Administration. Increasing the close quarters in the space discovery again is that the first ever United Arab Emirates interplanetary mission accomplished this same feat later within the same week. The United Arab Emirates Hope probe entered Mars orbit too. Such close competition certainly introduces new perspectives and even more levels of success to the Beijing space mission. Whilst Mars has long proved to be a problem and a point of mystery in discovery and space research, we have already gained a wealth of new knowledge from this new video footage, including geological observations from the Schiaparelli crater and the Valles Marineris canyons. Enceladus may have ocean currents like we see around Antarctica. At first glance, pictures of Saturn's moon Enceladus reveals a topography not unlike a pile of wrinkled bedsheets. The icy white surface of the lunar satellite is unlike our own earthy one because of the apparent lack of pitted, mottled craters caused by passing space debris. Instead, Enceladus is crisscrossed with jagged wrinkle-like structures that reveal the icy landscape of the moon that harbors a similarity with our own home planet, a vast, salty ocean. Unlike our own 7 seas, however, Enceladus has one globe spanning an entirely subsurface ocean. Furthermore, This space ocean is warmer towards the core of the planet and colder near its surface, as its temperature is regulated by the planets at over 30 kilometers deep as opposed to our 3.5-kilometer deep seas. But while there are many differences, there are a few key similarities. Among them, their shared salinities and currents. Earthbound scientists have studied these currents in the only environment that most closely mimics Enceladus. That's Antarctica. Due to the large but rapidly declining polar ice caps that cover the Southern Ocean, the water temperatures are similarly regulated. The currents in Antarctica are largely caused by and manipulated by wind and lunar gravity, but they are also influenced by varying degrees of salinity, just as they are on Enceladus. These space currents are propelled around due to the changing levels of density which are influenced by the amount of salt in the water. As salt water melts near Enceladus' north and south poles, the weight of the water changes and rises and falls accordingly, creating currents. So why are these temperatures and currents and varying levels of salinity on a distant Saturn-based moon so important? According to both the Jet Propulsion Laboratory and NASA, who jointly launched the Cassini space probe to study Enceladus, these oceanic similarities could be key to finding signs of life beyond Earth. The lunar ocean currents could distribute and maintain temperature, and saline-based NASA's Perseverance rover is ready to hunt signs of life on Mars. Arguably the world's most preeminent and famous geologist and astrobiologist has just publicly revealed the first results of NASA-led experiments to search for life on Mars. But wait, humanity has not even set foot on more than the moon, let alone Mars. Who is this scientific genius I have never heard of? Well, the astrobiologist responsible for the most exciting scientific advancement in space exploration to date is not human at all. It is the Jet Propulsion Laboratory-designed Perseverance rover. The world watched in wonder and bated breath as the rover landed at long last on the red planet back in February of 2020. In the year plus that has followed, the rover has been steadily at work conducting experiments on the Martian terrain and surrounding atmosphere, searching for signs of life. And now, nearly a year and a half later, the results of the experiments have finally beamed back to Earth. So what do they reveal? The rover has been working almost exclusively in what is called the Jezero crater, which is a large indentation that likely held some kind of ocean or giant lake millions of years ago. Using a robotic arm fitted with an X-ray scanner, Perseverance has been slowly scanning the surface and subsurface of the lake bottom and mapping the topography of the soil and surrounding landscape. Those images were beamed back to NASA for further study, and according to JPL geologist Abigail Allwood, they allow scientists to view the best ever composition analysis of Martian dust before it even looked at rock. Another cutting-edge space tool aboard Perseverance is lovingly dubbed Watson, or the Wide-Angle Topographic Watson, is responsible for taking extremely close-up and detailed pictures of Martian rocks so that Earthbound scientists can study their geological makeup for factors like color, grain size, and texture. Perseverance will also be storing and saving Martian rock samples on board its structure for later use by manned missions to Mars in the coming decades. Additional samples will be placed on a probe that will be jettisoned back to Earth for what can be sent to Mars. Perseverance is not working alone on the red planet, however. It is accompanied by the Ingenuity Mars Copter, a tiny 4-pound semi-autonomous drone-style helicopter that was tucked safely away in the belly of Perseverance until scientists at the JPL initiated a radio sequence that turned the helicopter on. Ingenuity is not designed to conduct experiments, but its purpose is to prove that flight, manned or autonomous, is possible within Mars' low-oxygen and low-gravity environment. The mini-helicopter has since been able to fly successfully for roughly a minute and a half, exceeding most engineering expectations. It does have a tiny camera attached to it, much like the drones used here on Earth, that have been able to send back picture-perfect, third-party perspective images of its mother craft, Perseverance. As the rover and its Mars copter explore the Martian terrain, the scientific developments that come from their research cannot be overstated. Mars is the closest planet to Earth that has the best chance of sustaining human life. We may be able to call ourselves Martians sooner than we expect. But what do you make of these interesting space discoveries? Explorers, experts, and, on occasion, Regular people make incredible discoveries every single day. Sometimes we don't hear about some of the ones that go under the radar, discovered under ordinary circumstances by ordinary people. So today we'll be taking a look at 3 fascinating discoveries. The hidden plane. There are a few places you might expect to find a plane, but you would be forgiven for thinking the last place on Earth you might stumble upon one is in the middle of the thick jungles of Papua New Guinea. So how did a World War II B-17E bomber end up in one of the most unlikely spots on the globe? Well, the story spans decades, countries, and even continents, but we can first begin in the Second World War. The United States had remained uninvolved in the war effort between the Allies and the Axis up until this point. That was until the attack on Pearl Harbor, which drove them to join arms with the side that would ultimately win the war. While the U.S. sent many soldiers to fight the Nazis in Europe, it was also focused on dealing with the threat of the Japanese Empire after the Pearl Harbor attack, and the U.S. subsequently to fight in what is known as the Pacific War. While not as commonly thought of in comparison to the combat in Europe, at least 10,000 U.S. men lost their lives in the Pacific War. During the fight in the Pacific in 1942, one specific plane, a B-17E Flying Fortress, was sent on a raiding mission to the then-occupied island of New Britain in Papua New Guinea. While the plane suffered damage from the defenses of the Japanese forces, the plane did not crash from damage alone. In fact, the plane was forced to make an emergency crash landing due to the plane running totally out of fuel. The Flying Fortress was supposed to land back in Australia, but instead the B-17E nose-dived directly into the Agambo Swamp on February 23, 1942. The plane's captain, Captain Fred Eaton, and the rest of the crew survived and was forced to withstand the harsh wilderness of the New Guinean jungle. For 6 weeks, the men managed to fend off starvation, the sweltering heat, as well as diseases in an unfamiliar region, and eventually managed to reunite with American troops. Despite the whereabouts of the men being resolved, the plane lays in the New Guinea jungle for decades afterwards, leaving many to wonder of its condition. Fast forward to the 1980s, and plans to retrieve the relic bomber began to move forward thanks to the efforts of pilot and collector David Tailish. It would only be in 2010 that the infamous bomber known in plane circles as the Holy Grail would eventually be recovered. Seen as the most uniquely preserved of the world's 4 recovered B-17E airplanes and given the nickname Swamp Ghost, is a fascinating time capsule preserved from one of the most historically significant periods in human history. Candido Amantini. Born in Italy in 1914, Candido Amantini was to become a great Catholic Passionist priest in Rome. His official title destined to be that of Reverend Father Candido of the Immaculate, a master exorcist, spiritual director, and confessor. From 1961 until he passed away in 1992, Candido Amantini was the saving grace of Rome. Renowned for his exorcisms, the priest would see anywhere from 60 to 80 people in a single day, pleading for assistance. He was stationed at the Church of the Holy Staircase, and as well as being an exorcist, he additionally taught sacred scripture and moral theology, even wrote a novel about the Virgin Mary. In his childhood, Amantini was the second of 4 children, born to Giovanni Battista Amantini and Delinda Frattini Amantini, Catholic family. The future priest was baptized exactly 8 days after his birth. At the mere age of 12, he entered the Passionist Minor Seminary in Rome in October of 1926, and by the time he was only 16, he began studies at the Passionist Novitiate on Mount Argentario in the Retreat of St. Joseph. It is here where he was gifted the name of Candido of the Immaculate, and took his temporary vows as a Passionist. In 1936, after he concluded all his priestly studies, including those of philosophy and theology in Lucca, he took his eternal vows as a Passionist, transferring to the Church of the Holy Staircase, where he studied to attain a degree in theology at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, which he got in 1941. He passed away after a long illness on the feast of St. Candido, his patron saint since his passing. The Vatican has gifted him the title of Servant of God, and his beatification is still being investigated by the Congregation for the Causes of Saints. The priest spoke Hebrew, Greek, German, and Sanskrit alongside Italian. His exorcism studies, however, came from Father Alessandro Coletti, exorcist of the Diocese of Arezzo, who taught him and even helped him conduct his first exorcism. Under his guidance, Saint Padre Pio of Pietrasena said Father Candido is a priest according to God's heart. Father Candido was a man of God, always calm, always smiling, never angry, even with the devil. He was on everyone's lips, well known in Rome, and has exorcised for 36 years without ever stopping. Donna Morth, who claims that Father Candido could see or medical care. The priest helped hundreds of faithful throughout his life, exorcising many people from bad spirits and demons alike. Donna Morth claims that the devil was afraid of Father Candido, who consistently cast him out of the bodies of victims. Candido allegedly had conversations with the devil during some exorcisms, where he would mock the devil with his faith and love in God. Donna Morth conducted with Father Candido from 1986 to 1990 and became his successor. Norman the Psychopath, Artificial Intelligence Gone Rogue. Since machinery is not inherently capable of original behavior and thought, artificial intelligence must be programmed to behave in its intended manner. Obviously, these systems are usually programmed to be quite affable with a cheery disposition. However, a team at the prestigious Massachusetts Institute of Technology recently created Norman, a psychopathic algorithm that was trained using images and data from the dark and ominous corners of the internet. When shown abstract inkblot images and asked what he saw, Norman always responded with bleak and often gory answers. An identical algorithm was trained with more generic images and data, and the contrast between the two systems is evident. When presented with inkblot images, the regular artificial intelligence reported seeing a close-up of a vase with flowers and a black and white photo of a small bird, while Norman answered, a man being shot and a man being pulled into a dough machine to the same images. IAD Rawan, who was part of the 3-person development team, believes that Norman has pointed out what this reveals about a darker aspect of machine learning, saying that data matters more than the algorithm. It highlights the idea that the data we use to train AI is reflected in the way the AI perceives the world and how it behaves. This has concerning implications for future artificial intelligence. If the same algorithm can create such vastly different outlooks in the machine, then they could also be trained, whether intentional or not, to hold biased ideologies based off of the data that they were programmed with. If the system is trained on a set of data that is flawed or inherently artificial intelligence will demonstrate these tendencies in its behavior, which could have huge ramifications for a future world in which AI plays a major role. Norman was created to demonstrate the way that the psychology of artificial intelligence reflects the naturally flawed behavior of humans and how there is no perfect equation that will create a machine that is unlike humans. An algorithm trained off material created by humans will naturally display behavior that is tainted with the biases and opinions of humans. Researchers and scientists studying these phenomena in the developing world of artificial intelligence are concerned for the possibilities of an intentionally created malicious AI, similar to Norman, and hope for more transparency and regulations in the development and distribution of artificial intelligence. These individuals point to Norman as an example of how the field must first analyze how to better balance the data that is used to train artificial intelligence and help to eliminate the flaws inherent in human-generated information. Norman has, as the Massachusetts Institute of Technology researchers hoped, provided an important red flag into a field that still has much room for improvement and development. But what do you make of these recent discoveries? As technology and human innovation evolve, scientists and archaeologists discover more and more about the world around us. So today we'll be taking a look at interesting discoveries from around the world. Such historians uncover long-lost World War I tunnel in France where 270 Germans were buried alive. During the Battle of the Chemin de Dame in 1917, several hundred German soldiers took refuge in an underground passage to escape the French guns. They didn't make it out alive, and this location became an enigma for more than a century. Covered by a thick shroud of limestone and sand, awaits some 250 bodies of German soldiers, buried in a tunnel a century ago. The position and the very existence of this tunnel have long been a mystery, An enigma finally solved in rather unorthodox conditions, which is a story within a story. The story is more than 100 years old and, as the Volksbund, which is a German association that cares for German war graves, well remembers, it is one of the countless tragedies of the First World War. On May 4, 1917, more than 200 German soldiers were buried in the Winterberg Tunnel, near the Ladies' Road, by a French shell that closed the entrance. As the oxygen ran out, the men suffocated and lost their lives or took their own lives. Only 3 soldiers held out long enough before they were rescued, a day before the ridge was occupied by French troops. One of these survivors, Karl Fisser, left a harrowing account of that agony. Everyone was begging for water, but in vain. A comrade lay on the ground beside me and croaked in a broken voice for someone to load his firearm. The names of the victims have been known since then and their fate was documented, but their bodies were never recovered. Both the German Association and the French National Office of Former Combatants and War Victims with French been searching for years for the famous tunnel, researching archives, checking documents, and comparing historical maps with current topography to pinpoint the exact location of the tunnel. Now, at last, they believe they have found it. The site where the men of the 111th Reserve Infantry Regiment from the southern Baden region suffocated during the Second Battle of Aisne and would have been on a wooded hillside near the French town of Cron, 160 kilometers northeast of Paris. Alan Malinowski and his son Pierre, amateur historians, found the entrance to the tunnel and carried out an illegal excavation at the site they had identified. There they found firearms, ammunition, bayonets, and hundreds of gas mask canisters, as well as the remains of 2 soldiers. Pierre then plugged the hole and contacted the authorities. German and French experts have agreed to carry out further technical investigations in the spring. The risks posed by ammunition and chemical residues, which can come to light through earthworks, must be taken into account. When the results of these investigations are available, legal bodies will decide together with community representatives on the future of the Winterberg Tunnel. Egyptian tomb in Sudan's Sai Island. Ancient Egypt was a technologically advanced civilization in its day. It was at the forefront of science, mathematics, and literature. It was a civilization that prevailed for 3,000 years before succumbing to the might of the Roman Empire. It had still managed to hold on to its rich and vibrant culture. At one point, the Egyptian Empire had control over vast swathes of what is now modern-day Egypt, Sudan, and the Middle East. Naturally, countless artifacts and remnants of the civilization have been found throughout its former lands, with each discovery providing further insight into this fascinating society. In 2015, archaeologists discovered an ancient tomb with an array of chambers enough for over a dozen mummified corpses. The tomb, which is believed to be around 3,400 years old, was found on the island of Sai, situated near the famous Nile River in the arid lands of northern Sudan. Historically, Sai Island and its surrounding areas formerly known as Nubia were mining hotspots for Egyptians, and as such they sought to protect the area with extensive fortifications and settlements. The island itself contained one of these settlements along with a gold mine. The nature of the work that the Egyptians did on Sai Island led researchers to believe that the bodies in the tomb were those of the gold workers, as well as those who maintained the settlements. Aside from the bodies, the tomb also had a collection of intriguing and potentially valuable artifacts hidden in its depths. These included gold rings, golden masks that were used to cover the dead, and scarabs, which were lavish amulets that had a design inspired by beetles due to their religious significance in ancient Egyptian culture. Some of these artifacts also contained hieroglyphic inscriptions. The researchers, eager to capitalize on any clues that the markings could give to aid the understanding of this mysterious discovery, deciphered the markings and found that the tomb was erected for a master gold worker by the name of Chemos. Researchers hypothesized that the other bodies in the tomb are likely to be his relatives. However, DNA sampling will be required to confirm this. Archaeologists hope that upon further scrutiny, the tomb and its artifacts will reveal more about the life of gold miners around the area. With that said, it will be no easy feat, according to Julia Butka, a professor of Egyptian archaeology, as the method of preservation has complicated the analysis of DNA. As of 2021, Butka and her team have uncovered something even more unexpected. They found that all the bodies in the tombs were part of the local population. Poses an interesting question. At the time, the local Nubians were ruled by the dominant Egyptians, and combined with the fact that all the features of the tomb were quintessentially Egyptian, it suggests that the dynamic between the ruled and the rulers may not have been so clear-cut as previously thought. Researchers are expected to continue unearthing mysterious revelations into the new decade. The Norwegian Viking saga. What do you think of when you think of saga? Do you think of reality TV shows, or maybe the word takes you back to your high school days? But one thing you probably do not think about when you hear the word saga is the Vikings. As a matter of fact, sagas are a Viking thing. They are defined as long stories of heroic achievement, especially a medieval prose narrative in Old Norse or Old Icelandic. One of the most famous Viking sagas is Sverre's Saga. One of the king's sagas is a group of tales of legendary or semi-legendary Nordic rulers. Of course, these age-old stories are only stories. There is no truth in them, and they were written purely for entertainment. Also, academics thought until in 2016, researchers made a somewhat unbelievable discovery. Scientists in Trondheim, Norway, discovered a strange skeleton at the bottom of a deep abandoned castle well. The bones did not resemble those of a poor animal who had simply fallen, but those of a creature much more familiar. As researchers began to piece together different parts of the discovery, they eventually concluded something truly startling. Let us go back to the Sverre's Saga for a minute. The saga is set in 1197, when the fearsome King Sverre and his ruthless mercenaries are unimaginably defeated at their castle Sverresborg. His attackers, a group called the Baglers, burned the castle down and left the king to die, throwing his men into a dark well in the fiery castle grounds. Neither the location nor the name of this castle was ever mentioned in more historically accurate documents. Researchers truly believe that the castle of the Sverre's Saga is actually the one where the skeleton in the well was found, and the skeletons themselves could be those of the men whose lives ended, defending Sverresborg that night in 1197. Data quickly backed these claims up. DNA analysis of the bones placed them with a body that existed in the 12th century, and analysis of the abandoned castle works concluded similarly. This means Sverre's Saga was actually true. And if this saga was true, then what does that say about the countless other mystical tales that for so long were thought to be figments of the imagination and nothing more? 3.6 million-year-old ancestor. Remember the iconic Beatles tune Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. Many students across the globe will have heard the tale of the excavation team who first discovered Lucy, or Australopithecus afarensis, as she's known to scholars one of the first humans ever discovered. The archaeologists would blast the Beatles' tune around their campsite. And when the time came to name their discovery, they had a certain song stuck in their head. For many years, Lucy was thought to be the oldest human ever found, as she was able to walk upright and more closely resembled modern-day humans than she did modern-day apes. But a recent discovery has shed light on the history of our bipedal ancestors and revealed something quite shocking. We have been walking on two legs for a lot longer than we thought. Described by some as Lucy's great-grandfather, a new hominid skeleton was recently unearthed during an archaeological dig in Ethiopia. Led by Dr. Johannes Haile-Selassie, an international team discovered the partial skeleton of an advanced human-like creature that is far, far older than old Lucy. In fact, around 400,000 years older. Nicknamed Kadanamu, meaning big man in the local language, the partially intact skeleton is that of a bipedal male who stood roughly 5.5 feet tall, and had pelvic bones that allowed for an easy two-legged stride. Lucy was only 3 feet tall and likely had a much smaller gait than her newly discovered ancestor. So what does this tell us about the whole history of human evolution? Well, much of that answer remains to be analyzed, but what can be definitively stated is that, in terms of direct ancestors, humanity is far older than previously realized. We were walking upright nearly 4 million years ago. The discovery of Australopithecus anumensis, as Kadanamu is scientifically known, has unequivocally changed the established chronology of human history and has given scientists infinitely more data to work with in their quest to understand our origins. But what do you make of these impressive recent discoveries? Our world is always moving forwards, continuously creating and producing new innovative products and technologies. But our modern research and developments extend beyond our latest phone model or the newest medicine breakthrough. Some of the most fundamental research we carry out today focuses on unveiling past mysteries and rediscovering the lives of societies who shape the world as we know it. So today, we'll be taking a look at 3 recent discoveries that have provided us with a glimpse into human history. Deep Sea Expedition uncovers 30 new species, plus longest known animal. It is widely accepted that the sea contains thousands of as yet undiscovered creatures. It seems that every time a research team dives to new depths, they uncover a host of new species. And the April 2020 expedition was no exception. A team of scientists from multiple institutes combined forces to document 20 dives and 180 hours of footage of the Ningaloo Canyons in the Indian Ocean captured by a deep-sea diving robot called ROV Sebastian. The robot was able to penetrate to depths of over 4,500 meters and captured video of many species that had not been seen in the area before, as well as several apparently entirely new species. Among these new discoveries was a giant red hydroid, which is a relative of the coral that appeared to be over a meter tall, as well as a new member of the Apolemia that is estimated to be over 47 meters long, making it the longest animal ever recorded. Technically, the Apolemia is made up of a giant colony of cell-like creatures called zooids and is classified as a siphonophore. Because it is made up of millions of tiny individual creatures, some would say that the Apolemia in itself cannot be classified as its own entity. However, siphonophores are particularly fascinating because each of the zooids, despite being individual creatures and not cells, act as if they were each carrying out specific functions that contribute to the viability of the larger whole, such as food digestion, reproduction, and propulsion. The Apolemia is without a doubt a creature of otherworldly proportions, as it was glimpsed the diving robot. The structure is not where the extraterrestrial illusions stop either, as the zooids are described by scientists as a jelly made of millions of interconnected clones, with each clone being specialized to do one of a dozen different tasks. What makes this specimen stand out so vividly for researchers is its enormous size. Most have been between 17 centimeters and 1 meter long, entirely dwarfed by the 47-meter length of this colony, whose hunting spiral spread across almost a 16-meter diameter, with tendrils dangling into the water below. The discovery of such an enormous example of a species already known has excited researchers about the immense possibilities for what could lie beyond the realm of our exploration, and one of those things could be millions more giant siphonophore galaxies just like this one, simply waiting to be discovered. Among the other species that were observed in the dives into the deep sea off of Western Australia were bioluminescent squid, glass sponges, long-tailed sea cucumbers, mollusks, barnacles, and squat lobsters that were previously not known to inhabit this part of the ocean. Specimens from the dives were collected and will be on display in Australia. It seems that the ocean will never fail to amaze us with its mysteries, and we may never truly know exactly how many unknown species are hidden and undiscovered in the uncharted depths. The deeper and deeper we are able to dive and discover, the more we understand that legends and ancient myths of sea monsters and unbelievable sea creatures might just be closer to the truth than we ever dared to imagine. We simply must continue to probe the deep sea floor in order to understand the true nature of the sea, of what exactly we are sharing our valuable planet with. Scientists climb into Siberian sinkhole in July of 2014. 3 massive sinkholes mysteriously appeared in northern Siberia, leaving scientists scratching their heads as they looked for an explanation as to why so many sinkholes of such large proportions appeared out of nowhere. Later that same year, a team of Russian scientists with the Russian Center of Arctic Exploration, led by Vladimir Pushkarev, ventured into the bottom of one of the sinkholes in the search for some answers. The sinkhole was so deep that the team had to use ropes to propel themselves 34 feet to the bottom, where they took probes, measurements, and samples and attempted to get to the bottom of what could have caused the sinkholes and whether we should be alarmed at their appearance. Although they have not been able to definitively say what caused the 3 initial sinkholes, whatever it is did not stop with just 3. In the years following the expedition to the sinkhole floor, at least 15 more have appeared across Siberia. These holes appear as deep caverns and funnels and are of an ever-increasing magnitude, leading scientists to study them even more intensely as they hunt for the source. The prevailing theory of the sinkhole creation is that methane is building up underneath the Siberian permafrost covering the Earth's surface, and then it releases in a colossal burst that causes the formation of the gaping caverns. Many think that drilling for gas reserves and other such activities in the region could be triggering this methane buildup, leading to the concerning number of explosions in recent years, while others attribute the cause to instability created in the tundra as a result of global warming, and still others believe it to be a combination of the two. Although the true cause of the creation of these sinkholes has yet to be determined, one thing is for sure: must be genuinely great. One of the largest and most recent sinkholes measured over 30 meters deep and 20 meters across, meaning that only an incredibly powerful explosion of some sort could have created it. Yevgeny Shuvalin, the leader of an expedition into this newest crater and researcher at Skolkovo Institute of Science and Technology Center for Hydrocarbon Recovery, has been attempting to find the root cause of the craters for years. He said the following: "Right now, there is no single accepted theory on how these complex phenomena are formed. It is possible that they have been forming for years, but it is hard to estimate the numbers. Since craters usually appear in uninhabited and largely pristine areas of the Arctic, there is often no one to see and report them even now. Craters are mostly found by accident, during routine, non-scientific helicopter flights, or by reindeer herders and hunters. This means that there could be more sinkholes on top of the ones that we've already discovered." Further muddling the scientists' search for an explanation is the fact that the sinkholes turn into small lakes relatively quickly after appearing, meaning that if samples are to be taken from the bottom, scientists must not only stumble upon the hole in the Siberian permafrost by chance, but then also move quickly enough to obtain samples and study the formation before it fills with water. Although continued study of the craters leads teams closer and closer to a solution with every sample taken, for now we are simply left to wonder at the massive forces that could be behind such an impressive explosion, and what it might mean for us humans and the planet that we live on. 430,000-year-old meteor explosion. Scientists who study asteroids, particularly those that entered the Earth's atmosphere thousands of years ago, have a rough time tracking the sediment. Fortunately, any asteroid that crosses Antarctica likely left a discernible trace, as the environment has been totally untouched and perfectly preserved for almost the entire history of the Earth. This was the case with an asteroid that plummeted to Earth 430,000 years ago, during the time that the first Neanderthals were beginning to expand across the globe. The asteroid never actually made contact with the surface of Antarctica, but instead exploded in the sky overhead in what is known as an airburst, leaving shrapnel, space rock, and intense damage to the Earth below. The location was lucky for 2 reasons. First, a similar explosion over a modern-day town, the isolated region of Antarctica, meant that hundreds of thousands of years later, samples from this meteorite could be extracted and studied, which is exactly what researchers did. And what they found surprised them. The samples of the Arctic meteorite did not resemble samples taken from anywhere else in the world, as they were bonded together in strange, glob-like formations. These discoveries have allowed scientists to piece together what likely happened, and even though the event was hundreds of thousands of years ago, based on the samples taken, they believe that the asteroid could have been as large as 150 meters wide. Because of the strange formations of the samples, the meteor likely broke up relatively close to the ground, which allowed the fragments full of nickel and magnesium to react with the Arctic ice to form the odd shapes. Air bursts are even more damaging than asteroids that contact the Earth, because the explosion can destroy an exceptionally large surface area, while destruction from the latter is usually limited to the crater that it creates. This Arctic airburst likely affected up to 100,000 square kilometers of Antarctica, with temperatures reaching up to 5,000 degrees Celsius. The fact that puzzle pieces like this from space events that occurred before humans even walked the Earth shows just how far science has come. Mysterious blobs of dense rock hundreds of miles tall sits deep inside our Earth. Our final discovery is a mystery whose origin has yet to be fully explained. Deep beneath the Earth's crust are two massive blobs of rock that resemble a pair of hands cupping the Earth's core. The word massive is an understatement, as these formations spread thousands of miles in either of the Earth's 1,800-mile deep mantle. Geologists have spent the last 4 decades trying to determine the source of these gigantic continent-sized formations that have been discovered under Africa and the Pacific Ocean. While some experts have suggested that these are tectonic plate fragments trapped beneath each other, new research points to an otherworldly explanation instead. Yuan, a PhD student from Arizona State University, suggested that the blobs are the remains of a planetary embryo the size of Mars, named Theia, that collided with the Earth in its early infancy 4.5 billion years ago. Yuan theorizes that Theia's mantle could have been several percent denser than Earth's. This theory would explain how it would have been possible for Theia's mantle to sink through the planet's lowermost mantle and surround our planet's core. In 2019, while studying the plumes of hot rock and magma from some Samoan and Icelandic volcanoes, scientists were able to identify several elements that date back 4.5 billion years ago, the time when Theia is suggested to have glided with Earth. While this data does support the collision theory, there is still not enough resounding scientific evidence to support it fully. The resulting impact is also the most popular theory to date about the origins of our moon. The collision would have caused the Earth's surface to explode into a sea of raging magma, shooting planetary debris out into space that would later form our only permanent natural satellite. Another interesting theory is that when the two primordial worlds collided, their cores fused into a single core, potentially releasing the chemicals needed to support life on our planet. It has also been suggested that these blobs are so massively dense that they contribute to the weakening of our Earth's magnetic field. While the planetary collision is the most popular hypothesis explaining the origins of our moon and the blobs cradling the Earth's core, scientists have still yet to find enough concrete evidence of Theia's existence. What do you make of these recent discoveries? Each year, scientists, researchers, and everyday people make incredible discoveries, helping us to better understand the world around us. So today we'll be taking a look at interesting discoveries. Educator helps rescue man lost in Santa Fe National Park for nearly 2 weeks. Hiking is a common pastime, especially in the USA, where there is an abundance of stunning national parks and hiking trails. Something you would never think you would find on a hiking trail would be what John Utsi found when he was hiking in Santa Fe National Forest. Hiking with his 2 children, John Utsi set out on a normal hike as he had many times before. However, this time was different. They began to hear noises as they were a few miles into the hike. After a few minutes, they realized it was in fact a man calling for help nearby. In total, it took a reported 20 whole minutes of back and forth shouting until they eventually found the man. Just off a steep hillside was a visibly injured and shaken man who continued to tell Utsi and his children that he had been stuck there for 2 weeks. Describing the lost man, Utsi recalled some physical details. His lips were incredibly chapped and bleeding. His tongue had swelled up, and not only was he visibly gaunt, he was barely making sense and was clearly delirious from the time he had spent lost. Leaving all the food and water they had with the man, they began the hike back to get him help. 3 miles later, John Utsi informed the relevant authorities, and firefighters from Santa Fe were on the scene within the matter of an hour. Utsi provided the GPS location of where they found the lost man, and the firefighters went to find him. Unfortunately, this is not where the story ends. After 8 hours of continuous searching, the man could not be found, and the search that day was reluctantly called off. Unable to just sit by whilst he knew the lost man was still out there, and not in good shape, Utsi took it upon himself and set out on the same hike to try and find him. After backtracking to where he was the previous day, Utsi located the man for the second time and immediately called the authorities. Around 4 to 5 hours later, rescue crews were on scene. One member of the rescue crew described the lost man as near the end, and it is reported that he went over a week without any food and managed to survive using his filtered water bottle in the creek nearby. The lost survivor is now recovering successfully in a hospital in Santa Fe. Archaeologists discover medieval woman and child skeletons at the Tower of London. The Tower of London is infamous for being the gruesome resting places of countless miserable souls throughout English history. The Chapel of St. Peter at Vicula lies inside the tower's walls and is the tragic burial place for Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, and other infamously tragic prisoners. The caretakers of the site requested to make the chapel more accessible, but before that was done, the area had to be excavated to ensure no historical relics or artifacts would be destroyed. Alfred Hawkins, a member of the Historic Royal Palaces blog, stated that archaeologists found 2 fully complete skeletal remains of medieval humans. Analysis of the bones revealed it to be the skeleton of a grown woman and child. It is believed that they were lower-class commoners or even destitute peasants, were most likely the tower's caretakers of sorts during the Middle Ages and probably lived within its walls. The bones were dated back between 1450 and 1550, a period in English history with the War of the Roses, the unforgettable reign of Henry VIII, and the cruel, unforgiving reign of his daughter Mary I, otherwise known as Bloody Mary. For the Protestants, she burnt at the stake. The skeletons were found in typical Christian burial fashion, their feet pointing east and placed on their backs. Nails were found around the skeleton of the grown woman, which implies she was buried in a wooden coffin that rotted away with time. The child, on the unfortunate end, seems to have been merely wrapped in blankets and placed into the earth. No burial trinkets were uncovered near them, and after being checked over by an osteoarchaeologist, they found that the woman was between the age of 35 to then 7 years old. Fortunately, neither child nor woman seemed to suffer from any grievous harm. Their deaths were not violent, and thus they were not executed prisoners of the dreaded tower, but instead seemed to have passed away from an illness. The woman most likely had severe lower back pain. Hawkins further said, "Their growth shows not a comfortable life, but one which is typical of the period in which they lived." The finding is exciting because these are the very first skeletal remains found at the tower since the 1970s. The reason why this discovery is so mind-blowing is that whilst historians always assumed there might be complete burials on site, records from the period claimed that burials occurred elsewhere. As far as everyone was concerned, before this finding no actual burials occurred at the tower apart from those taken to be buried in the chapel. The Tower of London has always been a drastically dramatic location, abundant with stories of woeful lovers such as Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, executed advisors such as Thomas More, who was King Henry VIII's Lord Chamberlain until the king had him killed, and significant figures such as Queen Elizabeth I before she was crowned. Sir Walter Raleigh and the mythical princes of the tower were imprisoned there for respective amounts of time. Though in the case of the princes, the popular leading theory is that Richard III had the boy's life ended after he took the throne. 2 sets of bones were uncovered under the tower's stairs. However, they have never been proven to belong to the young princes. The tower has existed for almost an entire millennium and in that time has obtained an amazing amount of history. Hawkins explains the intimacy of the discovery. Often an archaeological excavation and the information you gain from it feels fairly impersonal. Uncovering a Norman ditch here, a Tudor tile there, all of these physical remains enable us to create an image of the past, but the individual history of the people who lived in these periods can sometimes be elusive. This is why the archaeological excavation of human remains is so important. It allows us to examine the way in which people lived and died in our palaces. Archaeologists uncover secret passage to the underworld at Pyramid of the Moon in Teotihuacan. The antique city of Teotihuacan is the subject of much curiosity, especially now that an underground tunnel was uncovered by archaeologists underneath the mystical Pyramid of the Moon. It is believed that the tunnel symbolizes the Aztec passage to the underworld. In 300 BCE, the people of Mesoamerica built the great city as they expanded their settlements. At its prime, more than 125,000 people lived in Teotihuacan. At the time, it was the 6th largest city in the entire ancient world. Robert Cowgill, an archaeologist at the University of Arizona, has stated that it was the largest city anywhere in the Western Hemisphere before the 1400s. It had thousands of residential compounds and scores of pyramid temples, comparable to the largest pyramids of Egypt. It is unknown who built the city in its entirety. Teotihuacan is older than the Aztec people by an estimated entire millennium. There is evidence that a variety of cultures resided in the city through the centuries, including the Mayans, who influenced much of the architecture. Which culture or civilization created Teotihuacan cannot be confirmed, at least not with the limited evidence we have. The name itself comes from the Aztec word that means birthplace of the gods. However, Mayan hieroglyphs recognize the city as Pu, place of reeds. The city was in ruins when the Aztecs claimed it as their own, abandoned and forlorn for at least half a century, if not longer. Scholars are conflicted about what could have happened to the city. Some believe that Teotihuacan was abruptly attacked, its downfall resulting in a brutal siege by enemy forces. Other scholars argue that there is evidence that suggests a civil uprising occurred due to some unforeseen ecological catastrophe, such as famine, with the ruling class being overthrown. Another theory is that some natural disaster caused a vast population to decline and made survivors move away. There is residual proof of various buildings in Teotihuacan having been burned. The theory of enemy civilizations ransacking the city is widely accepted by scholars nowadays, though. However, the only structures with evidence of having been burnt are the ones believed to have housed the ruling class, coming full circle and suggesting a social revolt. The Pyramid of the Moon was traced back to between 100 and 450 AD and was used for animal and human sacrifice, though it additionally served as a burial ground for the victims of sacrifice. An altar resided in the pyramid dedicated to the great goddess of Teotihuacan. Dr. Veronica Ortega, an archaeologist, explained in the explorations carried out at the end of the 1980s through tunnels excavated in the body of the pyramid. Archaeologists Ruben Cabrera and Saburo Sugiyama found skeletons of individuals with cranial deformation. The news of this great tunnel, symbolic of the descent into the underworld meant for the victims of human sacrifice, makes us yearn for more knowledge. Knowledge that may never come to us, but is fascinating to consider. It is unknown whether the tunnel was added by the Aztecs, or if it had already been there before them. Perhaps someday we will finally find out. Vampires' remains were found 30 years ago. DNA reveals who he was. Some archaeological finds only begin to make sense much after their initial discoveries, as we are able to apply new technologies in the quest to understand the past. The mysterious remains found in Griswold, Connecticut are one such case. In 1990, some children playing on the that dated back to the 19th century. There were 4 graves still intact, and these were immediately exhumed for study by archaeologists. However, the 4th grave is what caught their eye. The body had been arranged with the skull and femurs placed into a skull and crossbones pattern on top of the other bones, indicating that the man had been suspected of being a vampire in life, and his bones had been rearranged sometime after his burial, to prevent him from leaving his grave and supposedly terrorizing the townspeople. Although the only identifying information on the grave was JB55 spelled out in small nails on the lid, likely indicating initials and age at death, researchers were able to conclude that this supposed vampire was a laborer who had indeed died at around 55 years old, probably from tuberculosis. It was not until July 2019 when a team of scientists announced the results of a DNA test on the vampire that the man's identity was revealed. The DNA was matched to the Barber family, and the man was determined to be John Barber. Barber was likely a victim of the New England vampire panic in the 19th century when breakouts of tuberculosis were frequently thought to be spread by vampires. The only way to determine if a suspected victim of tuberculosis was indeed one of the vampires was to dig up the grave and look for signs, such as inexplicable preservation of the body, a bloated abdomen, or apparent growth of the hair and nails. We now know that these are common signs of decomposition in improperly preserved bodies, but the townspeople of John Barber's time believed that it confirmed that he was a vampire responsible for the spread of consumption in the town. They removed his head and crossed his femurs over his chest, broke open his ribs, and removed what was left of his decomposing organs, which they then cremated to feed his supposed victims to cure them of his curse. Luckily for John Barber, we now understand the science behind death and disease and are able to give him the proper, respectful burial that he deserves. But what do you make of these recent discoveries? As a society, we are continuously finding new breakthroughs and ideas, whether that is repurposing existing inventions or being on the forefront of cutting-edge technology. So today, we will be taking a look at 3 recent announcements and discoveries taking place around the globe. Dried up lake reveals a forgotten Oregon town. In the 1950s, the village of Old Detroit was deserted and sunk in a reservoir. The West's epic drought, which has lasted more than 4 years, has just revealed a surprise in northern Oregon. The abandoned village of Old Detroit has resurfaced beneath Detroit Lake, which had record-low water levels in 2015. Marion County Sheriff's Deputy Dave Zahn was traveling along the reservoir in October when he came across an 1870s wagon partially immersed in the muck. Detroit's lake was 143 feet below capacity at the time. The wagon remained in perfect condition due to the low oxygen levels at the lake's bottom. According to United States Forest Service archaeologist Cara Kelly of the Statesman Journal, the wagon was probably damaged more in the weeks it was on land than it had been underwater for decades. The wagon, as well as an adjacent concrete octagonal pit that has yet to be identified, have now fallen underneath Detroit Lake after recent rainstorms raised the water levels. To prevent plundering and destruction, the Marion County Sheriff's Department and the nearby ranger station opted to keep the archaeological site hidden until water levels rose again. Receding water levels have also lately revealed a 400-year-old chapel in Mexico. In 1952, the 200-person village of Old Detroit was abandoned to make way for the construction of a new dam that would flood the area, about an hour east of Salem, and create the Detroit Lake Reservoir. Parts of the historic town became visible above the water every winter when the spillways of the Detroit Dam are opened to make place for spring runoff. However, the wagon has never been found before, and water levels have not been as low as they were in 2015 since 1969. It could be decades before the water levels in Detroit Lake drop to that lower gain, which is precisely what Zahn and the Forest Service want. The funerary temple of ancient Queen Nyet discovered. Earlier this year, on the 14th of January 2021, the Egyptian government unveiled what is believed to be the funerary temple of the ancient Egyptian Queen Nyet. According to Egyptian archaeological researchers, Queen Nyet was the long-known queen of the 6th dynastic Egyptian King Teti. The find has been regarded by Egyptologists as one of the greatest discoveries surrounding the ancient Egyptian civilization, made in the modern day, as it helps to shine a light on the obscure facts of the 6th dynasty. Despite nearly 100 years of archaeologists having been made aware of King Teti, not much has been recovered surrounding the 6th dynastic king, obscuring many prominent facts that have made it incredibly difficult to uncover further information about the king that ruled over 4,300 years in the past. With the discovery of the tomb of Queen Nyet, however, many new key pieces of information have come to light surrounding the 6th dynasty and the ruling family of the time. DNA evidence and recovered artifacts buried alongside the queen has confirmed that Queen Nyet was both the queen to the Egyptian King Teti and also his daughter. Although abhorrent in the modern day, back during the time of ancient Egyptian kingdoms, it was an incredibly common practice for the ancient pharaohs to engage in acts of marrying family members in order to keep their lineage pure, as they believed that their lineage had descended directly from the gods and so provided the ruling class with the belief that they were blessed with an innate ability to rule over others. Additional recovered artifacts would also confirm that the king would only reign for a period of 12 years, having been made the victim of an assassination involved in a harem plot to overthrow the king and replace him with a far more capable ruler. Melting glaciers reveal lost Viking-era highway. The Vikings may have captured our imagination with their larger-than-life exploits, but it is easy to forget that they were also practical people. They built sensible settlements with heating, language, and engaged in trade and travel. They were a vast and powerful domain. So in 2011, archaeologists first discovered a lost highway littered with Viking artifacts, a 1,700-year-old sweater, and piles of fossilized horse dung. But now archaeologists have discovered so much more. They have published new research describing hundreds of items found along the mountain pass: mittens, shoes, sled parts, and horse bones. This mitt, made from different pieces of woven fabric, was found in the Len Pass area. It is radiocarbon dated to the 9th century. It probably would have remained hidden forever if the ice had not started to melt rapidly, revealing all these Viking artifacts by the roadside. It paints a picture of a well-trodden highway that ran along the crest of Lomseggen Mountain, connecting travelers to commercial centers at higher elevations and to those all-important summer pastures. The highway crosses the Len ice sheet in the Jotunheim Mountains of Norway, about 200 miles north of Oslo. The pass was at its peak during the Viking Age around the year 1000, a period of high mobility and increasing trade across Scandinavia and Europe. This remarkable spike in use shows how even a very remote location was connected to broader economic and demographic events. Today, it is essentially a highway to nowhere. The Len ice shelf dominates the treeline, accessible only by helicopter. But that may change too, as global warming melts the once impenetrable shield. Using radiocarbon dating, researchers estimate the road origin at about 300 AD. At that time, a heavy blanket of snow would have padded the sharp rocks underfoot. Trading posts probably sprang up along the nearby Otter River. The road probably thrived for many centuries. The decline of Lendebreen Pass was probably caused by a combination of economic changes and climate change, with researchers saying that the Black Death likely also impacted the area. By the time the local area recovered, things had changed and the Len Pass was lost to memory. At some point, the road may have been destroyed by ice and snow, an event that likely played a crucial role in the preservation of these artifacts. To archaeologists, the Len ice shelf appears to be a gift from the ancient past, but it is alarming that it is happening so quickly. Global warming is causing mountain ice to melt around the world. Trying to save the remains of a melting world is very exciting. The discoveries are an archaeologist's dream, but at the same time, it is also work you cannot do without a deep sense of foreboding. 6,000-year-old hunting arrows revealed by melting ice in Norway. Archaeologists in Norway have unearthed hundreds of artifacts dating back to the Viking era, nearly 1,000 years ago. As mentioned, the artifacts turned up on an ancient road in a pass in the Lomseggen Mountains, where ice is becoming scarce due to climate change. Across the world, glaciers are losing more and more ground due to climate change. According to a study published in 2019, some 390 billion tons of ice and snow are disappearing from land-based glaciers every year. A decline that looks like a catastrophe on a global scale, but ironically for some is a boom. While the ice is melting, it reveals in some places archaeological treasures buried for centuries and whose existence was not suspected. This is what happened in the Jotunheim Massif located in the southwest of Norway. While conducting an expedition in a melting ice field, archaeologists uncovered hundreds of artifacts dating back more than 1,000 years. 68 hunting arrows used for reindeer hunting, some dating back to 400 BC, have been discovered in a slab of melted ice north of Oslo. Led by a team of researchers from the University of Cambridge, the operation also unearthed nearly 300 specimens of reindeer antlers and bones. Iron Age sticks, a shoe that is more than 3,000 years old, as well as cloth that may have been used to wrap meat. Located 300 kilometers north of the Norwegian capital, the Langfond ice sheet, where these objects were discovered, has retreated by more than 70% over the past 2 decades under the effect of global warming, according to the authors of the study. The oldest arrows, dating from 400 BC, were found in poor condition, but those from the 2400 to 1750 BC were very well preserved. The researchers explained that the movement of the ice sheets certainly led to damage, and the tools that were enclosed in ice sheets helped them rise to the surface. But what do you make of these recent discoveries? Within the past century, our technology has advanced to extraordinary levels. 100 years ago, The idea that we would reach the moon was nothing more than a fantasy. Yet now it is a fact of our everyday existence. With every single day we, as a united species, come closer to laying claim on other planets in our solar system and to exploring more space to see what is truly lurking out there just beyond our reach. So today we'll be looking at 3 scientific announcements and discoverers. Disappearance of Mel Wiley. Police Chief Mel Wiley was last seen on July 27, 1985 on a date with his girlfriend in Hinckley Township, a suburb of Cleveland. His car was found on July 30th at Lakefront State Park on Lake Erie in Cleveland, Ohio. Police performed a thorough search of the area and found no sign of Wiley. After searching his car, which was still locked, they found his wallet with $15 in cash, his police ID and badge, some sunscreen, a pack of cigarettes, and a beach towel. After performing an investigation among Wiley's friends, family, and co-workers, authorities ruled out the possibility of foul play. Wiley left work early a lot and seemed moody in the weeks before his disappearance. His friends believed that he had grown tired of his job but did not think anything of it. He had always wanted to retire at 50 so he could write full-time, but he ended up disappearing 3 years before retirement. In his spare time, Wiley wrote poetry and was a thriller mystery novelist. Before his disappearance, he was writing a novel about a homicide in Pennsylvania that he often spoke of to anyone that would listen. When police entered Wiley's home, it was spotless, and he had also left several days of food and water out for his 2 cats. After an extensive search through his belongings, his thriller manuscript was nowhere to be found. Other missing things were stamps, envelopes, his music collection, typewriter paper, and an address book. Most of his long-sleeved shirts were missing, which he frequently wore to cover the burns on his arms that he had suffered while serving in the military. The only thing left in his fridge was a jar of mayonnaise. The police later found out that his desk at the police station was empty as well, except for a key to his apartment. At this point it was as if Wiley had merely vanished into thin air, but after picking up his dry cleaning, police found the first of many strange clues. Located in the pocket of his police uniform were bus schedules from Cleveland to San Francisco. Wiley had written a letter to a female friend before his disappearance. He had expressed that he wanted to disappear and was tired of his life in Hinckley. The letter stated that he would be 2,500 miles away when his friend would receive his letter, roughly the distance between Cleveland and San Francisco. Police were able to decipher the letter by looking at the ribbon on his office typewriter. Investigators were never able to track down the original letter, and it appears that the friend never received it. As a police chief, Mel had access to all he would need to form a new identity directly at his fingertips. With access to a database of fingerprints and social security information, it is entirely possible that Mel leveraged his years in law enforcement to facilitate his disappearance. With his military background and several years in law enforcement, he would also know how to stay off the radar. Mel was the only suspect in his own case. He was declared legally deceased in 1993, per Ohio law, once he had been missing for 5 years. Mel could very well be enjoying his remaining years writing poetry and novels on the West Coast today. Having a passion for writing mysteries, Wiley's most tremendous story appears to have been the one of his own disappearance. The mystery of Sandy Island. Sandy Island is a small island near Australia that has been drawn on chart maps for over 100 years. The only problem is that it does not exist. Located near New Caledonia, in the southwest Pacific Ocean, Sandy Island was supposedly situated somewhere between the Chesterfield Islands and the Nereus Reef in the Coral Sea off Australia's northeast coast. It first appeared on maps in the late 1700s until it was semi-removed in the mid-1970s. Nearly 40 years later, it was once again brought up in conversation as an Australian research ship finally resolved the mystery and provided proof that it was non-existent. The island was quickly removed from all maps and datasets in 2012. In 1774, Captain James Cook of the British Royal Navy explored the French territories in the South Pacific. He charted the island just off the archipelago New Caledonia, labeling it Sandy 1. Although Cook managed to chart the Grand Terre Reef quite accurately despite his era and technique, he was incorrect about Sandy Island. Nothing is there. Interestingly enough, though, the island was reported by other ships 100 years later. From 1870 through the 1890s, the fictitious island was included in various Navy maps and listed in the Australian Maritime Directory. The nearest islands are the Chesterfield Islands, which sit about 100 kilometers or 62 miles westward of the original location. Historians do not know whether these cartographers and sailors were trying to correct Captain Cook's mapping, as they share the same island name, yet are positioned a few hundred miles further west than his. In the 1970s, the island became the Australian Hydrographic Service, or AHS, mapped the seafloor and measured the water depth to find the island. They were unable to find any shallow depths to indicate potential islands or reefs. They even flew over it and found nothing. In 1974, Sandy Island was officially removed from the hydrographic charts by the French Hydrographic Service. Despite this discovery, Sandy Island stayed on many bathymetry compilations for another 30 years because it was already included on the digital formats of maps by the U.S. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, or NGA, which is used as a standard coastline dataset worldwide. In November 2012, the Australian research ship RV Southern Surveyor sailed through the area where Sandy Island was supposed to be and debunked this mystery. They were studying plate tectonics and noticed that they had various differing maps and decided to investigate. They found no depths shallower than 1,300 meters below sea level or any indication of an island. What they did find, though, were floating pumice sea rafts. Pumice ejected from underwater volcanoes float together in rafts on the ocean surface and are easily mistaken for islands. A volcano study near Tonga showed that pumice rafts traveled over 3,000 kilometers, or 1,864 miles west, due to the wind and currents. These rafts ended up within 20 kilometers, or 12.4 miles, of the suspected Sandy Island's location, suggesting that the ships in the 18th and 19th centuries saw pumice, not islands. The island was incorrectly mapped for over a century, even managing to make it onto digital maps in 2010. The location was even listed on Google Maps, although it only appeared as a dark, pixelated space. After the research ship undiscovered the island in 2012, the National Geographic Society officially removed Sandy Island from its maps. Medieval drilled skull in today's world. Anyone with a disability can get access to treatment and support to help them in their challenges. However, this was not the same in the ancient days. To those in the Middle Ages, anyone with a deformity of sorts was suspected to be evil and plagued by spirits. This was no more apparent than the case of the medieval male skeleton that was found in the English countryside. His lower jaw on the left side had been deformed before his bones could fully fuse as a child. That in turn would distort his face, which might have been scary looking to any people he encountered. Accused of harboring evil spirits, the man with the facial deformity likely passed away in his 30s and was buried without his right hand or several foot bones. In the case of the missing limbs, it was most likely due to several visits grave robbers took to his remains. However, the most notable thing about his skeleton was that his skull had been trepaned, in other words drilled through, perhaps to relieve his pain or to exorcise the bad spirits. Thankfully, he survived and his bone area had healed, but that did little to fully relieve his community that he was entirely pure. In the end, he was buried in a lonely place without a coffin, was buried face down, and even had stones pressed on top of his body, despite the dirt covering him from above. Most likely the townspeople wanted to ensure that he never rose from the grave and that all his evil troubles were kept as far away as possible. Due to this treatment, it is easy to wonder what type of life this man might have led. Perhaps it is even more intriguing to wonder how such a drilling procedure would have taken place back in the Middle Ages. No matter what strikes your curiosity about this case, there is no doubt about it that it is full of mystery and wonder. At the end of the day, only one thing is for sure. People in the Middle Ages were obsessed with witches and evil spirits. But what do you make of these recent findings? To learn, adapt, overcome and discover is a key aspect of our human nature. Without the desire to learn new things, mankind would hardly have progressed from our primitive stages. Though our modern-day triumphs and findings are much more random in subject and not quite so survival-orientated, they remain important and intriguing nonetheless. So today we'll be taking a look at 3 recent discoveries. Mysterious island teeming with life only 4 years after being created. In 2015, the island of Hungatonga suddenly emerged in the southern Pacific Ocean near Fiji. A hidden underwater volcano erupted and drove the rock up to the surface to create the island. The volcano was situated between 2 already existing islands in the South Pacific, then connecting them to one oversized island. It's located in the Kingdom of Tonga and technically has no official name, but locals have dubbed it Hungatonga Hunga Hapai, which they call Hungatonga for short. It is a volcanic rock island situated 19 miles southeast of Tonga Island. It is made up of black gravel and is relatively small. Within the last 150 years, only 2 other volcanic islands have suddenly burst into the ocean like this. NASA and other research organizations have been studying the island closely, taking frequent GPS measurements to map out the island. Most of their research has been conducted purely by satellite or aircraft until 2019. For years after it initially emerged, they finally visited the island and observed it on foot. The scientists noted that the ground was not quite like sand and was quite painful to walk on. They also found that hundreds of seabirds had already nested on the southern cliffs of the island. Most surprisingly, though, was what they found on the black gravelly beaches. Beautiful pink and purple flowering plants were growing across the devoid island despite poor soil conditions. Scientists believe that the plant life grew because of the seabirds, called sooty terns, living on the island. They seeded the isle with their droppings. Whatever seeds and plants they ate were then transferred into the soil and fortunately took hold of the environment, allowing flowers to bloom on this mysterious island. Researchers are eagerly studying Hungatonga, trying to learn as much as possible about the process and qualities of rare volcanic islands before it erodes completely. Due to the harsh weather conditions of the Pacific Ocean and constant rainfall, the island is crumbling away quickly. Scientists are surprised at the rapid rate at which the coastline is eroding and are not sure how long it will take until it completely disappears. Until then, they will continue to observe the volcanic rock, take measurements, and watch the flowers thrive. The melting glacier reveals a World War I shelter and artifacts in the Italian Alps. Finding leftover artifacts from the tragic days of World War I is not unusual for Europeans, but it can certainly be frightening as the most common type of findings tend to be unexploded devices in marshes. The Italian Alps are a beautiful place, but for over a century they have concealed a moment in time frozen in front of our very eyes, keeping the time of the First World Conflict halted as the world developed and advanced around it. On a fateful day in November 1918, Austrian soldiers left their mountain station on the Italian Mount Scaluso, only for an icy glacier to form over the cave's entrance, trapping all the items inside. The glacier is beginning to melt, and as a result scientists have found countless pieces of memorabilia from the time of the conflict, stashed away beneath the icy exterior of the cave. Archaeologists and historians were aware of the cave prior to its melting, but because of the thick ice, they could not get through it until 2017, when the ice began to melt and thinned enough to allow them to enter and explore the cave and its contents. By now, the entire excavation has been fully conducted and archaeologists uncovered a plethora of things. From frozen food products, straw mattresses, utensils, jackets made of animal skins, and period-based newspapers. This little cave revealed in full what life was like for the soldiers in 1918, or at the very least for those soldiers who fought upon the mountainside. Stefano Morosini stated that the artifacts are a representation, like a time machine, of the extreme conditions of life during the First World War. The group of Austrian soldiers was about 20 men in size, and they lived in the cave with an altitude of 10,151 feet in the air. Survival itself was a struggle, not to mention having to fight alongside the harsh environments. In the winter, the temperature of the Italian Alps could drop as far as -40 degrees. There is an overwhelming likelihood that the majority of the soldiers sent up to the Alps perished from hypothermia or avalanches, which can also be common during the winter instead of passing away in actual conflict. Stefano Morosini added, soldiers had to fight against the extreme environment, fight against the snow or the avalanches, but also fight against the enemy. The fighting in the Alps is now romantically known as the White War and has had several poems written about it, glamorizing it especially during the early 20th century. The battle lasted for 3.5 years until the Austrian soldiers retreated from Mount Scaluzzo. Countless individuals are spread across the mountain's range. Marco Gazzoni, one of the archaeologists who excavated the glacier cave and a worker at the Museum of the White War, said, "A corpse is found every 2 or 3 years, usually in places where there was fighting on the glacier." Hikers in 2020 came across a chilling sight of a frozen corpse of a soldier, with several within the last few years. NASA approves asteroid hunting space telescope to continue development. Recently, NASA officially backed the NEO Surveyor, or the Near-Earth Object Surveyor, and its further development following a mission review's thriving results, which proved it useful for future intents and purposes for protecting our planet from intergalactic dangers. The review's authorization means that the NEO Surveyor is now eligible to move on to the key decision point B state of its development, colloquially known as the preliminary design. This space telescope obtains infrared lenses which are specially made to improve NASA's defense systems in the case of potential life-ending disasters from outer space. The NEO Surveyor is meant to discover any potential threats and run them through an inbuilt list of characterizations that will identify them accordingly into various categories, including comets and asteroids, among other dangers. Mike Kelly is one of the experts on the NEO Surveyor team and a program scientist at the headquarters of NASA, and he states, NEO Surveyor will have the capability to rapidly accelerate the rate at which NASA is able to discover asteroids and comets that could pose a hazard to the Earth. And it is being designed to discover 90% of asteroids 140 meters in size or larger within a decade of being launched. Currently, NASA has confirmed that an estimated 40% of nearby objects of the desired size have been found. The goal for the future is for the NEO Surveyor to be able to uncover up to 90% of all objects close to Earth, more substantial than 1,000 meters or 3,280 feet in size. Kelly Fast, one of NASA's program managers, commented about the usefulness that the NEO Surveyor could have for future endeavors. Each night, astronomers across the globe diligently use ground-based optical telescopes to discover new NEOs, characterize their shape and size, and confirm they do not pose a threat to us. Those telescopes are only able to look for NEOs in the night sky. NEO Surveyor would allow observations to continue day and night, specifically targeting regions where NEOs that could pose a hazard might be found, and accelerate the progress toward the congressional goal. Fast's comment holds ground when the criticality of discovering and analyzing NEOs is taken into consideration. Time wasted on the characterization of comets or asteroids can cost us greatly in the future and take away precious moments which could be spent trying to protect ourselves from imminent catastrophes. An NEO Surveyor investigator, Amy Meinzer, agrees with Fast's comment and confirms that the ability to search for NEOs in the daylight, especially in the direction of the sun, could be of huge help for astronomers. Meinzer additionally complimented the NEO Surveyor's ability to combine infrared light with ground-based observatories and their usage of radar, which could assist the telescope in precise detection of any NEO's position in space. The official launch of the NEO telescope is currently set to occur 5 years from now in 2026. Mr. As great and small surround us, we can never truly be too sure of anything because science is an ever-changing form of art and an endless source of knowledge. Our past can be altered with one unearthed artifact to make us question all truths. Our future is abundant with fears and excitements when it comes to potential technological developments. But what do you make of these interesting discoveries? The National Aeronautics and Space Administration has been the leader in space exploration. For years now, their missions have helped us to better understand the cosmos, along with teaching humanity that space is the way forward, and that, in the near future, humans could become a spacefaring species. Every other day, it seems that NASA are making incredible discoveries, and one of the most recent ones was that of Comet Leonard. As stated on NASA's website, when Comet Leonard, a mass of space dust, rock and ice about half a mile or 1 kilometer wide, makes its closest pass on January 3, 2022, it will be a journey 40,000 years in the making. Ahead of its close approach, 2 sun-observing spacecraft capture these views of the comet. Different images are useful for seeing subtle changes in Leonard's eye and tail. The trail of ionized gases streaming from the comet's body or nucleus, which becomes longer and brighter towards the end of the clip. End quote. However, it was during this event that NASA photographed something strange forming between us and Venus. Online users who are watching the event can help but notice that a large shield-like object appeared to form, and this happened during Comet Leonard's closest approach. The stereo-ahead H2 camera was the one responsible for this footage, and you can see that a large structure appears between Earth and Venus. Venus is on the left side of the screen, while Earth is on the right. And just as Comet Leonard passes by Earth, you can see this large object form, with many saying that it looks like a huge structure that covers the Earth, even stopping some of the tail of Comet Leonard from reaching Earth. What's strange about this footage is that the odd shield-like object doesn't appear until Comet Leonard comes into view. And more importantly, as Summer pointed out, doesn't appear until it's in line with Earth. With some saying that it's almost like this object is protecting Earth from this object, or any space debris that may be coming from Comet Leonard. Interestingly, this isn't the first time that this strange object has been detected by the stereo camera. Back in 2020, it was captured during the 12th of March when it was viewing the Lagoon Nebula, along with Venus and Earth. When the photographs were shared, people were just as excited, saying that the artifact resembled a large whale and appeared to be firing a beam in front of it, leading some to suggest that something huge may have been protecting Earth from space debris. This footage that is captured by a telescope on board NASA's Stereo B spacecraft is interesting because it comes from NASA directly. These probes can be found on either side of the Sun and help NASA and other scientists to view the inner workings of the solar system, especially helping them to observe space objects that come within close proximity to Earth. As mentioned, this isn't the first time that this mysterious triangular object has been spotted. One person said the following: "Does anyone else remember the wheel that was spotted a while back? Looks very similar to this, but I remember that NASA said it wasn't anything interesting." To me, the strangest thing about this is how it's not there until the comet passes by us. It's like it just forms as the comet is in line with Earth. I'm interested to see what NASA's explanation will be. End quote. Another person said this: "I don't really see how people can argue this. These photographs and videos were compiled from NASA, so there's no questioning where the footage has come from. I have no idea what this object is and how it's able to form like that." End quote. NASA, though, have told people that the object in question can be explained, saying that what we're seeing is just a recurring image artifact caused by internal reflections of a planet. They addressed this footage and said the following on the Stereo's official website: "Some people have noticed a strange triangular or diamond-shaped object entering the field of view on the telescope of Stereo. You can see this feature in question in this movie moving from right to left, just above the octal on the right side of the image, and more clearly in this close-up movie. What is this? The answer lies on the exact opposite side of the image. At the same time as this strange-looking feature starts to be visible, the very bright planet Venus enters the field of view from the lower left. Notice that Venus and the feature stand step almost exactly opposite each other across the middle of the detector. This is not a coincidence. The strange-looking geometric object is actually an internal reflection of the planet Venus, and we can see this within the telescope's optics. The strange-looking geometric object is actually an internal reflection of the planet Venus within the telescope optics. This effect has been seen many times before. Here's a particularly striking example of internal reflections caused by planet Earth, as seen in early stereo emissions. This was taken from my image artifacts pages. Earth is also visible in the December 2011 movie, but it's not as bright as Venus. It's the stationary objects to the center left. As an added bonus, the tail of Comet Lovejoy can be seen entering from the left towards the end of the movie, just below Venus. Here's a diagram showing the location of the various features in the image. End quote. One astronomer carried on with the following. The images you have seen certainly look interesting under these specific conditions. However, we have explained this time and time again. These photographs usually come up every other year, and each year the explanation is also the same. These anomalies can always be explained using internal reflections. End quote. So what do you make of these interesting discoveries? Volcanoes can be unpredictable. Lucky for us, scientific equipment is much more advanced than it used to be. And this has helped us to determine when a volcano is close to erupting. One thing that equipment can't do, though, is protect people. Several years back, a tourist fell into the crater of a volcano in the Democratic Republic of Congo. Scientists at the time announced that Ms. Sang climbed over the crater rim in order to get a better look at the volcano. Misplaced her footing and fell more than 100 meters. Researchers in the region who went to investigate what happened announced that after the fall, she was resting on a ledge that was just above the lava. Cleston Kasaga, director of the Volcanological Observatory in the nearby city of Gomez, said the following: "She didn't survive, but they haven't yet been able to remove the body. The equipment was used in order to see how she was, and if she had survived the fall. And although officials said that they could see initial signs of movement, they had to call off any further investigations due to poor visibility. Due to her showing signs of life, a team went out there that comprised of 20 Indian peacekeepers from Congo's UN mission, along with volcanologist Shak Daru. At the time, she was traveling through the local national park with guides when the incident happened. The guides did warn her and told her not to venture too close to the rock. However, as they turned away, she made her way down in order to get a better look at the volcano. Nothing else has been announced, but news stations in the region reported that she passed away from injuries, and that the team wanted to venture down and bring back her body. Another similar story is that of a 21-year-old student named Kyoko Matsumoto, who voluntarily threw herself into a volcano. This incident happened back in February 1933. The volcanic crater of Mount Mahara can be found on the Japanese island of Inzuoshima. Ms. Matsumoto was a student at the time and attended Tokyo's Jisan College. At the time, though, she'd met another student and soon started to develop feelings for her. She soon penned a letter which reads as follows: "Dearest, I am bewildered to distraction by the perplexities of maturing womanhood. I can stand the strain no longer. What shall I do? I should like to jump into a volcano." End quote. Being in love with another woman would have been frowned upon at the time. And knowing this, she decided that Mount Mahara would be her final resting place. Oddly enough, Mount Mahara was known in the region as a place where people would take their lives. It's not known exactly why this is, but some have suggested that the reason for this was because it was so easy to reach, and once you reached the top, there was an easy accessible observation post that allowed you to look inside the volcano. Although this story is the most well-known one and has been linked to the volcano. Over 10 years before this event happened, people were throwing themselves into Mount Mahara. Although these events were rare, it's a sad truth that they did happen. At the time, people who were struggling would also make their way to the top of skyscrapers and use that as a way out. However, owners and officials decided to put preventative measures into health, and so placed radios and other fixtures in order to drastically reduce people going up there. This worked, but Kyoko Matsumoto would end up finding another way out by using Mount Mahara. Tomoto told her friends about Kyoko Matsumoto, and instead of causing people to fear the location and stay away, it actually had the opposite effect. After the story in love letters made the rounds, people started to make their way to the volcano in order to do the exact same thing. Matsumoto even started to gain somewhat of a celebrity status. This was after the story got picked up again and featured by the mainstream media. Her note was reprinted and once again saw a surge of people make their way up to the volcano. And they did the exact same thing. It was also announced that back during 1935, Tomoto had passed away, although what she passed away from is not entirely understood. Authorities and officials had revealed that at one point people were jumping into the volcano every week, with them saying that in 1936, over 600 people had jumped into Mount Mahara. Authorities eventually took action and placed a fence around the base in order to deter people from going up there. The last story involves someone who fell into a volcano and survived. One of the strangest volcanoes is that of the mountain god found in Tanzania. Strangely, its lava never exceeds 500 degrees. Back in 2007, a local actually fell into this volcano during one of his active lava flows. The individual managed to pick themselves up and climb out. Although reporters in the region noted that he had suffered from multiple burns, except from this he was okay. It's very likely that he's the only person to have fallen into a volcano and survived. Volcanoes have been a source of fear and fascination for centuries. Humanity has respected, revered, and even worshipped the world's volcanoes, while caring from what nature could do to them. Even now, in our age of logic, we find ourselves at risk of their immense power and the danger it holds over our mortal lives. So what do you make of these stories? Gates is currently financially backing the development of sun-dimming technology, with the idea that sunlight would be reflected from Earth's atmosphere, which hypothetically should cool down the planet. The Stratospheric Controlled Perturbation Experiment, funded by Bill Gates and launched by Harvard University scientists, want to spray these chemicals into our atmosphere. The scientists have said that this in turn would create a massive chemical cloud that would help bring down the temperature of the Earth's surface. At the moment, though, many scientists are speaking out against this, saying that dimming the sun is something that we've never done before, and that if it goes wrong, it could have massive irreversible effects. Many of these scientists have outright said they want the experiment banned, saying that although Earth is heating up, there's other ways that we can calm it down. And spraying loads of chemicals into the sky is a risk that we shouldn't be taking. Many researchers and scientists are asking government officials to block these experiments, saying that we don't have enough data on them to be able to make an accurate prediction about what will happen once they're in the sky. One paper that was recently published reads as follows: Solar geoengineering deployment cannot be governed globally in a fair, inclusive, and effective manner. We therefore call for immediate political action from governments, the United Nations, and other actors to prevent the normalization of solar geoengineering. Rather worryingly, the project director called the whole thing terrifying. He said the following: "The problem with this is even if it works, we have to continue doing it, and we don't know how that's going to affect everything else that's going on. The fact is, whatever opinions I or other people of my generation have about solar geoengineering, including people who think it should never and can never be used, we're not the ones who's going to decide. The decision we now face is whether to study it seriously, and from my perspective, doing serious investigation of the risks, and how well it works provides the next generation with better information to make a more informed decision." End quote. To put this into perspective of how something so little like increasing or decreasing the temperature can have on everything, just an increase of 1 degree can cause heat waves like we've never experienced before, and create huge mega waves and storms that would destroy coastal regions. With the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration predicting that these giant waves and megastorms could cause trillions worth in damage, pointing out that in recent years 300 weather and climate disasters have cost over $2.1 trillion worth of damage. The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration said the following in 2021: there were 20 weather climate disaster events with losses exceeding $1 billion, and this was just in the United States. These events included 1 drought event, 2 flooding events, 11 severe storm events, 4 tropical cyclone events, 1 wildfire event, and 1 winter storm event. This isn't the only thing that Bill Gates is funding. The Gates Foundation has said the following message on their website: to bring about the kind of changes that will help people live healthier, more productive lives, we seek to understand the world's inequities. Whether the challenge is low-yield crops in Africa or low graduation rates in Los Angeles, we listen and learn so we can identify pressing problems that get little attention. Then we consider whether we can make a meaningful difference with our influence and our investments. Whether it's a grant or a contract, Bill Gates has come forward in recent years with many interesting predictions, is vocal about the issues we're facing in the world, and has said that he's trying to work with the world's best researchers in order to tackle these. Back in 2018, various news outlets reported that he started working on a microchip. The microchip in question has been described as being tiny, around the size of a pepper flake. The idea behind this is that it would be embedded inside a patient and would be able to track their medical records while also keeping them updated. William Grover, who works at the University of California, was given a grant from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. Grover's lab is using microchips that will go directly into patients. Each of these microchips is unique, and the researchers have said that one of the benefits to this is that patients' records will be much safer, and that clinical mistakes will be greatly reduced. Interestingly, it was announced back in 2018 that Swedish people were using these microchips, which were replacing ID cards. Not long after this, it was reported that a Swedish company started to ask its employees to have these microchips embedded underneath their skin. They said that one of the main benefits was that it helped with passing through locked doors and other secure places. It's believed that between 3,000 and 4,000 people have had a microchip installed in Sweden, and the chip is smaller than a single grain of rice. The increase in people having chips installed under their skin has been on the increase over the last 3 years, with officials saying that the technology was first introduced in Sweden in 2015. One individual named Erica said the following: "The microchip that's inside my hand has helped me to replace the need to carry around many daily necessities. This includes my office keycard and gym card. When I arrive at work, I simply have to wave my hand close to a small box and then enter a code and the door opens. It's very convenient and it saves a lot of time." So what do you make of Bill Gates and the projects he's working on?